we'll kick off. Okay, so I'm just gonna kind of get my slides ready and kick off the session. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the presentation. The title is a three-step process to a fruitful future. My name is Colm Kennelly. I work for IBM. I do a lot of work with our business partners, such as ProStrategy, and they very kindly invited me along to to present today. So let me just start by talking about what I hear from customers, people like yourselves, regarding their planning processes. And I think that the biggest issue that I hear all the time is that it takes too long. And it takes too long because of the tools that people are using. Most of the people that I speak to are looking to spend more time on analysis and less time on manipulating spreadsheets. They want to be able to do things like create more scenarios, and they want to be able to forecast more frequently. So that's kind of the background of the issues that people are struggling with. So the solution that we'll look at today is called IBM Planning Analytics. Now, this slide summarizes very well, I guess, the key themes of what it's providing: speed, agility, and foresight. So talking about speed, it has an in-memory engine, which I'll talk about, but that supports extremely large, multi-dimensional planning data sets. It provides fast performance on large and complex aggregations of data and large and complex calculations. It has support for Excel, which means you can retain what is for most people a familiar interface. And the workspace, which we'll talk about in some detail, presents a highly user-friendly experience. On Foresight, we provide access to Watson Analytics as part of the solution. Business users can explore data in a guided way. They can uncover trends, and they can use advanced analytics to understand what the things that are driving results. And on Agility, it's a business-owned solution. It's flexible. It doesn't rely on IT departments. This means that plans can adapt and change, and allow you to change very quickly. And just talking about those in a little bit more detail. So as we go through the demo, we will see examples of how the in-memory engine helps us to plan better. Excuse me. And that will include, as I mentioned, working with large data sets. It'll also include creating new scenarios and versions on the fly, as well as modeling and analyzing multiple alternative hierarchies. Now, the hierarchy piece is interesting. This is a relatively new capability, but it's really quite powerful. What it means is that we can analyze key dimensions in the business, such as products and cost centers, in lots of different ways. So, for example, we may want to model reorganizations of our cost centers or our companies. We may want to look at our products using a customer roll-up as well as a product type roll-up. And I think it'll become a lot clearer when we see it in the demo. On Agility, we offer a choice of three interfaces depending on the end user requirement: web, mobile, and Excel. And I'll talk briefly about those in a moment. We also provide advanced business intelligence capabilities through integration with Cognos Analytics, or Cognos BI, as a lot of people will know it. So the web interface is called Planning Analytics Workspace. Now, I won't give too much away at this stage because we will see a lot of this in the demo. And I think the important point here is it's all user roles. And what I mean by that is it's designed for people who just want to look at some numbers and maybe do some basic interaction with it. Excuse me. It is designed for people who want to maybe input data and create scenarios. It's designed for people who want to create content for maybe themselves or maybe other colleagues. But it's also designed for people who need to build and maintain models, and it's all done from within the same web interface. Now, one of the goals that the product developers work to is what we call a continuous delivery model. And what that basically means is that new functionality is delivered every 3 or 4 weeks when it becomes available, rather than waiting for a major release cycle, which every year or whatever, which used to be the case. Cloud customers get the new features automatically. On-premise customers get them via fixpacks. One of the other goals of the product developers is that the workspace can provide the finished article as regards dashboards that might be presented to senior managers and executives. And I'll show you an example of one that I put together towards the end of the demonstration. We will also see examples of the tight Excel integration in the demo. So the Excel add-in gives us a live link to our planning data. It gives us the ability to create highly formatted reports. We can even create scenarios within here and perform data entry. So it's a very functional, user-friendly Excel interface. The IBM solution can be used to identify the drivers of results using predictive models. It can be used to generate statistical forecasts from historic and external data. And the self-service capabilities mean that users can use natural language commands to create their own analysis. Now, the IBM solution it's available on-premise or on cloud. It's the same solution. I will be using the cloud version today, but everything that I show you can equally be done using the on-premise version. Final slide. The solution is used by thousands of companies around the world. This is an example of one of them, Alaska Airlines, who I was surprised to hear are the 6th biggest airline in the US in terms of both revenue and passenger numbers. And you can see for yourself, I won't go through this in detail, it'll be made available to you afterwards, but you can see for yourself the benefits that they achieved, the key one being a 50% reduction in the time spent on budgeting. Okay, so that's it in terms of the intro. So let's take a look at the product, and I'm just going to minimize this presentation. And yeah, so we're going to look at the product. So I'm going to log on to the workspace via my browser. So I'm going to open that up, and pardon me. Now, because I've switched interfaces, I just want to make sure if there's any problem seeing my screen. Hopefully you can see the IBM Planning Analytics workspace in my browser. If you can't, let me know. But if I don't hear from you shortly, then I'll assume that everything's okay. Okay. So I'm going to spend a lot of time in this workspace that I mentioned at the start. So I've logged on as an administrative user, but it's important to point out, as I mentioned, it is designed for all user roles. So as I said, it's people who will be just inputting numbers or doing some basic interaction, people creating scenarios, but also people who will be modeling and the system and administering it. Okay, and we will see examples of all of those roles as we go through the demo. Now, in this demo, I'm going to use the scenario of a clothing retailer, and this is a clothing retailer that has got stores across Ireland. Now, like every organization, they have a number of steps that they go through when they're planning. So I'm going to open up a book within the workspace. And before using planning analytics, this organization had a number of challenges with their excuse me, with their spreadsheet-based planning process, which I'll talk about. So in their planning phase, they wanted to set high-level objectives or targets for where they wanted to be by the end of the year. And among the many challenges that they faced, the two main ones were, well, firstly, dealing with large volumes of data at different levels, such as data by store, by product down to SKU level, 52 weeks worth of data, multiple versions, etc. And the second challenge was being able to create and compare multiple scenarios of the data. So let's look at some of the ways that planning analytics can address some of those challenges. So here I have a view that allows me to input and manipulate data. So right now I'm looking to set some targets across the organization, and there's nothing in here at the moment. But I want to start using some historic data as a starting point for my targets. So for the product total for volumes, if I right click on here, it brings up a menu that allows me to do a lot of different things. But the thing that I want to do is to spread some data. So I'm going to get some data relative to something else. So I'm going to get the data from another data set in the model, which is actual data. That's my starting point. And I'm going to spread the data across my stores, across my products, proportional to what's in actuals at the moment. And I'm going to start with 1 million in my volumes for my target, and then apply that. And then it pops in my initial target of 1 million, which is split across my products and split across 52 weeks and split across my stores. And I'll come back to that in a moment. I had already loaded the price or the average transaction value. So one times the other, that gives me my initial sales target of 20 million euros. Now, I know that the management team is looking to achieve better sales from women's wear. And what they also want is the ability to test and compare, this scenario and potentially many other different scenarios. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a personal scenario, or as the software calls it, a sandbox. And I'm going to create that. I'm going to give it a meaningful name, which is going to be women's wear push, because we're going to be pushing those products. I'm just going to create that. So I have been asked what the prices would need to be, what price we'd need to achieve to achieve sales of 8 million, but assuming that our volumes won't change. Okay, and I've just heard the meeting center ping. I'm just going to check I haven't got any urgent messages. Nope, I think we're okay. So I'm going to carry on. Okay, so I need to achieve 8 million, but volumes won't change. So for women's wear, I'm going to right click on that number and hold it. And then on this value here, I'm going to again right click on here, spread the data, and I want a value of 8 million. So I can type in 8M, replace the number, and then it works out at all levels within women's wear for all my stores across all my weeks what the selling price should be to help me achieve that target. Okay, so I've been able to do that in real time, on the fly, create a new sandbox, apply the change, and then see the impact in blue of my changes. Okay. Now, so the next thing that I'm going to be asked is, well, how does that compare to the original scenario, the original sandbox? Okay. So it's very easy for me to click on this ellipsis here, and then I can add that sandbox as another dimension to my view. And if I want to compare sandboxes, I can just drag that into the rows and see how, what impact that's going to have compared to the original scenario. And I can see the impact across stores. I can drag in my store hierarchy, which is quite a detailed look, but let's summarize that up to location type. And then let me look at the sales number. So I can see what the difference is. And I know the next question that I'm going to be asked is, can I look at that visually? So the management team will probably want to see that in a nice graph so they can see the impact of the change across the business. Let's go for a column chart. And in fact, let me just swap those dimensions so I can see very, very clearly what the difference is between those two scenarios. Okay. So I can see what's happening. I can see what the differences are. I can use that visualization. And then assuming that the management team is happy with this scenario, I will commit the numbers. And it just prompts me that these numbers are going to become the base. So the base and the new scenario are effectively the same. So what have we seen so far? We've seen a combination of shortcut commands. We've seen scenarios on the fly. We've seen large data volumes, and we've seen a graphical user interface. Okay. So just coming back to the story, coming back to the scenario, another challenge that this organization faced was planning for new stores. So as part of their growth strategy, they wanted to plan for stores that would be opened in future periods. And in the past, this was very difficult for them because it meant creating and modifying a huge number of spreadsheets. So let's look at how planning analytics help them meet this challenge. So here I have a view that allows me to input various parameters about a new store. So those include things like a store ID, a name for the store. So we're going to open up a new store in Cork. We're also going to specify the location type, because this organization has different stores depending on the market that it's going after. So this is going to be a high street store. It's not going to open until period 6, so it's not going to be there on day 1 for the financial year, but it will be there in week 6. And we're also going to assign it to the south region, and the reason I'm doing that will become more apparent later. Okay, now this is a retail example, but this kind of the ability to update structures and hierarchies can really be applied to any organization. So this could be setting up a new company, setting up a new cost center, setting up a new project, could be launching a new product or launching another income stream. Okay, so I'm going to hit the run button, and that's now gone away and added Cork into my into my store hierarchy. And in this example, I've used the concept of a model store as a starting point for my new store. This is something that I've done for other customers. They have a store which is kind of what they expect to happen for a new store, and that gives them a starting point, and then they can play around with some of the inputs and the drivers and change that. So it copies the data from the model store into Cork from week 6 onwards. So a lot of things have happened there. So like I say, it's added Cork to the store hierarchy with a baseline plan. Now I can see this when I come to my budgeting workflow. So when I come onto here and look at our budgeting side, if I just refresh this, it now tells me that I've now got a new store for Cork in high street stores. And the other thing to point out, and this will become apparent later as well, all of my reports are up to date. So for this organization, that ability to add new stores, as we've just seen, that saved them countless hours compared to their old spreadsheet-based process. Okay, so we've seen some of the initial planning tasks, setting targets, planning for new stores. So now let's turn our attention to budgeting. And this company was looking to plan more often and involve more people in the budgeting process, but they were limited, obviously, by what they could do in spreadsheets. So planning analytics was able to help them in many ways, and one of those was through workflow visibility of budgets. So here we can see at all levels of the store hierarchy where we are in the process. So we can see who's finished, who's still working on it, who hasn't started yet. And it's capabilities like this. I mentioned Alaska Airlines in my slides. It's capabilities like this which can help reduce planning cycle times by 50%. Now, for budgeting, planning analytics gives a lot of flexibility to end users when they're doing their budgeting. So firstly, I don't have to go in and look at each individual budget. I can go straight to, let's say I'm the manager responsible for high street stores. I can open it up at that level. And it opens up a default view of my plan. So we're currently looking at version 1. I'm looking at high street stores, and I've got budgets by period, which are made up of individual weeks. Now, so there's a lot of flexibility that the tool gives you. Let me just enlarge this window so you can see it a bit more clearly. There's a lot of flexibility that I have when I'm doing my planning. One of them is, I can drag and drop these dimensions around on the screen, change the view to something more meaningful and more personal to me, and I'm not breaking the underlying aggregation logic of the model. So I want to look at my stores in the rows, and I can see the new Cork store with its data from week 6 onwards, as per the parameters we put in while we're planning. I might want to look at a product view. So I want to see my products in the columns, and there's a big old product hierarchy here made up of children's wear, menswear, etc. But actually, I'm going to focus in on a handful of products, and I actually want to do planning for shoes across the whole hierarchy. So what I can do, rather than have to cherry pick them from a list, we've already got a subset for shoes. So I want to look at children's shoes, men's shoes, and women's shoes. And the other thing I can do to really help my planning, I can create a custom consolidation. So I can aggregate those which weren't already aggregated for me, so that I can do a total shoe level number if I want to plan. Okay, so very flexible. Other things I can do, so this is looking at square footage. I want to look at volumes. I might want to see it graphically as well as see the numbers. And also I want to maybe create my own sandbox or my own scenario on the data. So I'm going to create a sandbox and call it columns plan. Okay, so I'm going to create that sandbox. And I think for these 3 stores, the volumes for next year, I think we can probably do 50,000. So I can type that in at the top level. It breaks it back over all the stores. It breaks it back over those 3 products. I can see the impact on my sales number. So I'm looking at nearly €1 million in revenue from shoes for those 3 stores. Okay. So I like those numbers. I'm happy to run with that. I can now commit those numbers, and those are the numbers which get rolled up into the overall plan. Okay. So that was just a quick look at some of the capabilities, some of the flexibility that we offer to users who are doing their budgeting. Okay, so the other big challenge that this organization faced in budgeting was creating and managing multiple versions. So whenever assumptions changed, it was difficult to communicate this to budget holders. It was difficult to issue revised models in an efficient and timely manner. And so let me show you how we help them. So this screen allows me to add a new version. So let's say we finished version 1. We're now rolling over into version 2. So I'm just going to hit the button, and that's created a new version for me. And all that's really done is just create a placeholder for data in the model. And I can visualize this. If I come back to any view, such as this one here, for example, and if I were to change this to, let's change it back to an expiration. And if I drag my versions onto here, you'll see that I've got version 1 and I've got version 2, which is blank. Okay. So the normal step that people would go through is, having created a new version, we want to copy data from a previous version. No, let me just reload the book so I can do that. I now want to copy the data from the previous version, version 1. Okay, so all I need to do is hit this button here, copy the data, and this will take 10 or 15 seconds. But what it's doing is really, really very powerful, because it's copying all of my assumptions, all of my data across all of my stores, all of my products down to SKU level, all of my weeks, copying that into a new version. It's also setting version 2 as the default version that we're working on for inputting and reporting. And we'll visualize that in a second. So the other thing I can do is, having created version 2, copy the assumptions from version 1. I now might want to go in and update the model to reflect changes in the price. So in version 2, I think that children's scarves, I've spoken to our supplier, unfortunately they're going to increase the price to £2.20 from week 3 onwards. And I can just repeat that value across all of those periods. And from the budget holder perspective, if I'm back in looking at my individual budget at a region or a store level, if I want to look at, let's say, Kinsale, for example, a couple of things to point out. I can see that we've now set it to version 2, which is what I'm working on. And if I look at my assumptions, so if I go to my cost of goods sold assumptions, which are read only, I can see that price increase coming into effect from week 3 onwards. So, you know, we can see there really how it's very easy for us to create new versions on the fly. It's very easy for us to copy data from previous versions, update our assumptions, and then it all just flows through in real time. And hopefully you can see from that, that's one of the ways where we can save lots and lots of time for our customers. Okay, so that's a little bit on budgeting. Now let's turn our attention to forecasting. So I'm going to show just a couple of examples of forecasting. I mentioned at the start, Alaska Airlines have moved to a rolling forecast. Obviously, having a system like planning analytics in place makes it much easier to do rolling forecasting. So in this example, I can see that for the year of 2017, I've got actual data up until period 6, and then from period 7 onwards, I've basically copied some budget data into here. So, clearly I could go through and I could plan line by line, period by period for our products. But actually, what I want to do is just maybe either put in an overall total for 2017, or I could actually put in an overall total for the rolling 12 months. So again, a good way to visualize that, I'm just going to create a new scenario, and I'm just going to call it the rolling forecast scenario. And if I now come back and let's say I want to, for this particular product, I want to change the annual total. I think we can increase that by 4%. Then you can see that obviously because I've got actuals up until period 6, they don't change. But if I look further out, then I can see the effect coming in for the remaining periods. Okay. So I'm telling it what I want to do overall for the year, but recognizing the fact that the first 6 months, the first 26 periods are locked down and can't be changed. As I say, I may choose to look at a rolling 12-month view. So instead of looking at just 2017, I might want to look at period 6 in 2017 right out to the end of period 5 in 2018. So it's very easy for us to create these rolling forecasts based on the underlying model. Okay, so that was a brief overview of planning, budgeting, and forecasting. I now want to move on to the theme of analytics. And to begin with, I'm actually going to talk about forecasting again. So we've just seen how it can be done, relatively manually by combining actuals and budgets and adjusting these to create a forecast. I just very quickly want to show you how you can use planning analytics to do regression forecasting. Now, in simple terms, what that means is that we want to look at historic data, be that sales or costs, but we want to look for seasonality and trends in that data, and then use that to project forward what we think will happen in the future. So at the moment, this view is blank deliberately. As an administrator, I can actually run a process to load some historic data. So I'm going to switch into edit mode now in the workspace, and I'm going to stay in this mode for a while because now I want to do some, tasks which are more administrative rather than end user. As I mentioned up front, this is about all roles, and my role as an administrator, it's up to me to make sure that we're getting data into the system. So I've got a process which goes off to one of our underlying financial systems, run a process to import the historic data, which is finished. And if I now refresh this view, I can now see a regression forecast. So the blue columns are showing me the actual data, as you can see. So I've got 2 years by month of historic data, and then I'm forecasting 3 years ahead based on the seasonality, based on the underlying trend in the data. And each product will have its own seasonality and trend. So if I look at children's tops, we can see there's a completely different seasonal profile to that information. And similarly then, if I look at children's trousers, we can see a completely different trend. There's spikes at different times of the year. Maybe when children are going back to school, we would sell more of them. So we can use statistical techniques to help take some of the guesswork out of forecasting and use statistical methods. Okay, so the next part on analytics is on hierarchies, which I mentioned up front. Okay, so I'm going to jump into the hierarchy screen. So up until now, we have been looking at one version of the store hierarchy. And you remember earlier when I added the Cork store, I assigned it to the South region. And the reason for that was to allow me to summarize and analyze data this way. So I haven't already created the hierarchy for region, so I'm just going to do that right now. So all I need to do is just right-click on the region column and then choose the option to create a hierarchy. And then, yes, I do want to create a hierarchy from that attribute. Okay, so it's done that for me. Now let me just switch on the store name. Yeah, and you can see that here. You can see I've now got Kinsale, Cork, Waterford rolling up into the south. Athlone, Mullingar in the Midlands. I've got Dundalk in the north. Okay, but the best way to really visualize this is to use it against some data. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to remove this from the workspace. I don't need to work with it anymore. And I've got a view of my store P&L, and I've actually bookmarked it just so I can get to it. I can get to it quickly. So I've got this hierarchy view, which I'm going to add into the workspace. And that's looking at the main or the natural hierarchy of my stores. But I've just created the region hierarchy, so let's use that. So within the same dimension, I can drag region into the columns. And that's now quite a useful view. So I can see what our financial numbers will be by store and by region, all off the same dimension. And I can create visualizations on this. I may want to look at this as a stacked column, see how that looks, for example. Or I may want to, potentially I could even do planning at this level. I might want to think about our volumes for version 2 across these different dimensions. So I might want to plan for high street stores in the south or metro stores in the Midlands. And I can do that using this particular view. Okay. So the hierarchy capability is very powerful. As I said, it means I can have a base set of data, which is rolled up in unlimited ways, either for alternative groupings like we've just seen, or it could be that I may want to have different organizational roll-ups over time. Reorganizations, I guess, is what we call them. And you've seen me just create that on the fly using this browser-based interface. Okay. Now, the next piece on analytics is on self-service capabilities. And again, I made the point earlier, this is designed for all user roles. Now, some of those users won't be as familiar with the data as I am. And also as administrators, we can't second guess every query that we will have from our end users. So we can deal with that requirement by using the self-service capabilities of the solution. So rather than have to search through the model for the data that I want, I can literally type in what I'm looking for and let the product find the data for me. So if I'm interested in, let's say, menswear volumes for version 2, I can literally type that in, hit enter, and then it goes away and it looks for data for me. So it's obviously found something. So it's found something in numerous cubes, and then it creates a view and then orients it based on what I asked it for. So menswear volumes version 2, 342,000. Okay, so that kind of answers my question, really. But really what it gives me is a good starting point for a further analysis. So I'm going to use this view to begin with. Now, it might be interesting. So that's looking at the rolling 12 months. It might be interesting to look at the number just for 2017, for example. So I can change that. It might be interesting to see this by store. So I can drag stores into the columns. And again, it's giving me the full store hierarchy, but I can choose a view of that which summarizes it up into, let's say, location type. It also might be interesting if, to maybe instead of looking just at menswear, maybe I want to compare menswear to all of our products. Yeah, see how they're doing against children's wear and women's wear. And it might be interesting to look at this graphically. So maybe a stacked column, because we're looking at 2 dimensions across, a stacked column might be a good way to look at it. And let me just, that's taking up a lot of space on my screen. Let me just resize it and move it around on the screen a bit, because I'm going to use this space for other things. So, I've started with literally a blank page. I've typed in the information that I wanted. The system has gone away and created a view for me. I've customized the view into something which is more pertinent and something that I really wanted to see. And I've been able to do that without being an administrator of the system. Okay, so that's what we mean by self-service analytics. Now, a lot of users will be comfortable using the browser, but some users will be more comfortable using Excel. So I'm just going to come away from the workspace momentarily, and I'm going to launch my Excel add-in and use Excel to look at some data. Now this gives me a live link into my planning data. So if I choose my planning analytics menu add-in, I'm going to log on to the server that we've been working with. And it's a live link, so it obviously needs to know who I am, because that governs what I can see, what data I can see within here. So this live link allows me to explore data that we already have in the system. It allows me to create highly formatted reports as well. So to start doing that, there's three things I could do. I could open an existing report. I could create a new one from scratch and just drag and drop in the data that I want to see. Or, as I'm going to do here, I can create a report using an existing view as a starting point. So this one here, which we looked at a moment ago when we were doing the hierarchy piece, that might be a good place to start. But before I commit this to Excel, I wouldn't mind having a quick preview. I'm going to open that up in a viewer to see what it looks like. And that looks okay, actually. That's a good starting point. So I'm going to use that as an exploration. So I'm going to drag that put that into Excel. Okay, so it's brought my information into Excel. You can see that I'm showing all the stores, but it recognizes that I've got roll-ups by high street, lifestyle, etc. So I can drill up and drill down on these hierarchies. It may be that I want to see, might want to see my products in the rows. I can swap the columns. And maybe instead of looking at budget, I might want to look at actual data. So I can slice and dice the data, and it's coming back and pretty much give me an instant response to my exploration, to my questions. Okay. Yeah, so this is a great way to just explore the data, to connect to the data, and just quickly create a view. But as I said, I can also use it as a starting point to create highly formatted reports. So let's say the report I want is going to be more of a P&L style view. So I'm going to drag my measures into the rows. I'm going to look at the product total, and I want my versions in the columns. Just drag and drop that. Now, dragging in the versions dimension, it's going to show me all the versions that I have, and there's quite a few. But I only really want to work with a subset of those, and I've already created a subset which is called my reporting subset, which is just showing me actual budget and the variances. I'm going to replace what's in there and apply that. So that's probably a neater starting point for creating a report. Now that I'm ready to start formatting my report, I can convert this to a custom report on this sheet. And once I've done that, I'm pretty much now in the world of Excel. So, I want to make this look a bit more presentable. So there's a number of things that I would do to make a report more presentable. For example, I would get rid of grid lines. I don't like these borders that it's used from the analysis. I'm going to get rid of all my borders. But as you can see, I'm basically in the world of Excel now. So a couple of other things I would do really quickly just to make this more presentable is just maybe put in a few extra rows on top, so I can put in a title. Yeah, use a bigger font. I know from experience it's always good to try and make the length of these selectors consistent, so I would do a merge and center left for all of those. And like I say, I know from experience this will look better, and you'll see this in a moment why I'm doing this. Merge and center left. Other things I would do would be right align column headings, maybe use a bit of a background on there. I might want to insert some rows just so figures can stand out. Again, all I'm doing is using Excel functionality with the live link to the database. Probably do some borders here maybe. So do like a top border on these numbers, Maybe do a bigger font for this one, maybe so 12, so it stands out a bit more. And then the last thing I would do would be some conditional formatting. As a quick example, use Excel conditional formatting to do color scales. Okay, so in a matter of a couple of minutes, we've connected to our underlying planning data. We've created a view, we've formatted it, and I'm quite happy with that. So that's something that I want to keep. So I'm going to publish this up, and it's going to store it up on our planning analytics server. Just call it 3 steps. I'll make it public so that anyone else who's got access to this folder will be able to run the report, obviously limited to the data that their security allows them to see, and publish it. So it's there when I need it. I can go back and open it again. I can run it maybe for a different year, for a different product or whatever. But the other really powerful capability is I can now use that same report in my workspace. So coming back into where I created that graph, if I expand out and go to my content, let me just tidy this up a bit. If I go to my applications and go to my Excel reports folder, I've now got this 3 steps web sheet, which I'm going to bring into here, and I'm going to drag up beside the graph. I'll just make that a bit bigger. Okay, so I combine content from the browser, from Excel, into one sheet. One thing which would probably make this report a bit more interesting is if I could filter on the stores, but maybe not necessarily have to do it from this drop down on here. So I can go to our store dimension and then use that as a selector widget. So in other words, if I click on the store here, it will update my view. It'll update both the web sheet and the graph. Okay, so let me do that really quickly. A couple of things I need to do. I just need to switch on the ability to synchronize dimensions on both of these objects. Okay, and that's really all I need to do. So if I now look at High Street, both the graph and the report update, if I change it to lifestyle, I can see visually both the graph and the numbers updating. So, in terms of self-service, it's very user-friendly. It's very easy for me to alter content both in the browser and in Excel and combine those into one view. I did mention at the start that this can be used for what we would call the polished presentation, the finished article in terms of dashboarding. So here's one I made earlier. If I go to my analytics dashboard, very similar to what you've already seen, we can obviously combine pictures and graphics. We've got some numbers, so some key metrics that we're keeping an eye on, such as volumes, revenue, margin, and profit. We can make those stand out as individual numbers. We can combine different graphical views of the data. And again, the one thing which is missing from here is my ability to select versions. So if I say, take that version dimension, drag that into here, add that as a selector widget. If I now choose, let me just save that. If I now choose actual, then my numbers update and my graph updates. So that's everything I wanted to show you, really. I guess just a quick sort of reminder of what we've looked at. So planning analytics is all about speed, agility, and foresight. So we've seen how the in-memory capability allows you to process large volumes of data in real time, create new scenarios on the fly, and model the structures in real time. We've seen how the foresight, the ability to use statistical models, helps us to do better forecasting. And we've seen the agility of the interfaces. We've seen the ability for all levels of user to work within the workspace, and the ability to alter content in Excel, which can also be consumed in the workspace in a self-service environment, which is also highly graphical. Okay, so we're coming up on 10 to 12. That's everything that I wanted to show you. We do have some times. I'm going to unmute the lines if there are any questions that you may have. Now would be a good time to ask them. This does often happen. Nobody either wants to be the first to ask a question, or I think because we're not face to face, it isn't the ideal environment for asking questions. I guess what I will say is, first, thank you for your time this morning. Thank you for logging on and going through the session with me. I hope it was a good use of your time. The guys from ProStrategy, I'm sure, will be following up with you. If you have any questions about anything that you saw this morning, then you will have contacts within ProStrategy Coleman to follow these things up. Other than that, I will give you back 10 minutes of your morning. So go wild with your 10 minutes. Is somebody speaking? No, somebody wasn't speaking. So again, thanks for your time. Goodbye.
That's great. Thank you, Colin.
Thanks, Colin.
Thanks, Tony.